The Varades Compact has a standard form for incidents involving unauthorized boarding of a registered freighter. I know this because I have filled one out 3 times in my career. The third time, I filled it out while the boarding party was still technically on the ship. I had the time. We were 11 days out of Orvik Station, running a contracted haul through the shattered arm corridor, a stretch of transit space that the Compact calls disputed and that everyone else calls what it is. The Havoc, our ship, was not a young vessel. She was a Graben-class bulk hauler, which is a polite way of saying she had been everything else first. A colony resupply run, an ice-stow barge, and for 3 uncomfortable years, a livestock transport. You could still smell that last one in Bay 2 if the air recyclers were running slow. The hull was patched in 17 places I knew about, and probably more that I didn't. She flew because she was built when they built things to last, and she was maintained by people who understood that a well-placed length of bonding tape on a non-structural seam is not a repair. It is an affirmation of engineering principles. I was co-pilot and cargo officer. My name is Marin Voss. I mention that because the incident report asks for it, and I have been filling one out in my head ever since. The raiders came in from the ecliptic shadow at about hour 260 of the run. 3 ships, Keth-class interceptors, chitinous hull plating, compound sensor clusters, the sort of design that makes them look like something that molted and decided to stay armed. They were Vreth, insectoid, 2 sets of manipulator limbs, a clicking speech pattern that the translator renders into something between a formal demand and an insult, which may simply be how their language works. Our captain, Doral, had dealt with Vreth before. He said they were opportunists who did their arithmetic fast and liked the answer to come out easy. They hailed us on open channel. The lead ship's commander, I learned later his designation translated roughly as 17th of Molt, opened with the standard declaration of interdiction, which in Vreth custom apparently includes a brief inventory of why the other party is not worth taking seriously. It is traditional. We were informed that our vessel was of pre-compact manufacture, which was accurate, that our hull signature indicated significant structural patching, also accurate, that our crew manifest logged 4 persons, which against their 40 was described as, and I am working from the translator's best effort here, a quantity of prey too modest to be dignified by the word prey. Doral asked them to stand by. He came back to the cargo bay where I was already reviewing the manifest. Petra, our engineer, was at the pressure console. Haskell, who handled the winch systems and knew more about cargo rigging than anyone I had met, was sitting on a canister eating a flatbread. We looked at Doral. Doral looked at us. He said he was going to let them board, and that we should continue with unloading prep as if they were not there. We agreed this was reasonable. He went back to open the main lock. The boarding party came through in 2 groups of 6. They fanned out the way people do when they are expecting trouble and finding none, which tends to produce a particular kind of confusion. They stood in Bay 2, yes, that Bay 2, and looked at us. We were, at that moment, running the pre-delivery check sequence on the cargo. 41 sealed industrial canisters of Verox 9 catalytic slurry, rated Class 7 corrosive, bound for a processing facility on Orvik's secondary moon. The canisters were held in place with a rigging system that Haskell had assembled across 3 deployments and which looked, I will admit, like it had been assembled across 3 deployments. There was cable. There was a friction lock array that Petra had fabricated from a gutted pump housing and some threaded rod. There was bonding tape, applied in ways that were structurally considered even if they were not aesthetically restful. The Vreth looked at all of this. They clicked to each other at length. The translator on Doral's collar caught enough of it to render a general impression. They had found the arrangement amusing. One of them, a secondary rank soldier, manipulator limbs still in the half-folded resting position of someone who has not yet decided the situation merits effort, reached out and touched the friction lock array. He clicked something. The translator offered, manual operation, unpowered single function. Petra said, without looking up, that yes, it was manual and unpowered, and that this was intentional, and could he please not apply lateral pressure to it. He applied lateral pressure to it. Petra moved his manipulator off the housing the way you move a child's hand away from a burner. Not unkindly. Calmly. She said the lock was currently set to 42%, and that the canisters it was securing contained a substance with a secondary containment rating of 400 psi, and that if the lock slipped past 30%, the pressure equalization valve on canister 14 would interpret that as a hull breach event and vent accordingly. There was a pause. I looked up from my manifest. I should note that I was not trying to be dramatic. I had a genuine question about the delivery notation on canister 37, and I happened to look up while I was thinking about it. The Vreth commander, 17th of Molt, relayed to us through Doral's collar, asked what vent accordingly meant in practical terms. Haskell, who was on his second piece of flatbread by this point, said it meant that approximately 200 liters of Class 7 catalytic slurry would achieve atmospheric dispersal across an area of roughly 9 meters. He said this in the way he said most things, which was the way a man says something he learned from a technical specification and has long since stopped finding interesting. He added that the reason we used the manual friction lock and not a powered system was that Verox 9 interfered with electromagnetic actuators at close range, which was also in the specification, and which was why the entire handling rig was mechanical. He offered the Vreth commander a piece of flatbread. The commander did not respond to this. I had sorted out the notation issue on canister 37. I made the correction and initialed it. 17th of Molt collected himself. He clicked at length and the translator produced a demand. He wanted the full cargo manifest. All 41 entries, read aloud, with classification ratings. This was, he said, a standard inspection right under the arm's local interdiction protocols, and he was well within his authority to require it. Doral said that was fine. He handed me the manifest board. I read all 41 entries aloud, slowly, because the translator needed a moment on the technical terms. The Vreth commander stood very still and listened to 41 descriptions of substances with containment ratings, dispersal coefficients, and emergency response codes that ran, collectively, to about 4 pages of documentation. When I finished with canister 41, a secondary catalyst with a modest rating of Class 5, which felt almost anticlimactic by that point, there was a silence in Bay 2 that had some weight to it. 17th of Molt asked, through the translator, what we were carrying on the return trip. Doral said we usually ran empty on the return, but that we had a provisional contract for processing ash from the Moon facility, if that cleared. The commander asked what classification that would carry. Doral said it depended on what they'd been processing that week, but probably Class 3 at the low end. Another silence. Doral asked the boarding party if they needed anything else, or if we could finish our pre-delivery sequence. The Vreth held a conversation among themselves for about 90 seconds. The translator caught fragments. There was significant discussion of the phrase 40%. There was also, if the translator was reading tone correctly, a reconsideration of the earlier arithmetic. The word the translator eventually settled on for the overall tenor of the exchange was recalibration. 17th of Molt informed us that they were satisfied with the inspection and would be departing. Doral thanked him for the thorough review. The boarding party returned to the main lock with the careful movements of people who have recently been introduced to a new variable and are very conscious of the floor. We completed the pre-delivery sequence. Petra reset the friction lock to 70% for transit. Haskell finished his flatbread and began the winch check. I filed the incident report, unauthorized boarding, no cargo interference, no crew injury, boarding party departed voluntarily, and sent it to the compact relay at Orvec without flagging it urgent. The Havoc delivered 41 canisters of Verox 9 catalytic slurry to the processing facility on Orvek's secondary moon, 11 hours ahead of contracted schedule. The facility manager said it was the most punctual delivery they had received that quarter. I thought about mentioning the boarding. Then I thought it wasn't really relevant to the delivery window, and I let it go.